You will
I
bend the
accept your
knee, or your
rejection.
people will suffer
The
the
hall fell
consequences.
silent until the
My
Alpha
people
King
will
lost
starve
control.
before they bow to a
The air was
tyrant.
heavy with the scent of wax and burning pine, mingling with the tension that seemed to grip every corner of the hall. Nobles in dark cloaks whispered in quiet clusters, their eyes flicking nervously toward the throne at the far end. There the Alpha King Kalen sat, a figure of power and control, his black cloak flowing over the steps, his gaze sharp and commanding. Kalen's eyes swept over the assembly, a predator assessing his domain. Yet when they landed on her, Lady Alara, something shifted, almost imperceptibly. She stood tall, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her posture unyielding, her gaze meeting his without fear. The crowd had been expecting awe, submission, perhaps even trembling, but Alara gave nothing. Only a quiet, unshakable dignity. The Alpha King's voice rang out, smooth and deep, echoing against the vaulted ceilings. "Lady Alara," he said, each word deliberate, weighted with authority, "I offer you my hand in marriage. Together we shall unite kingdoms, strengthen our people, and rule as the strongest of all." A ripple of whispers ran through the hall. Some gasped. Others leaned forward, curious. The nobles had long feared Kalen, not only for his unmatched strength in battle, but for the cunning with which he ruled. To reject him was almost unthinkable, an act few had dared even imagine. Alara's lips curved slightly, not in mockery but in calm certainty. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the hall. "I cannot accept your offer, your majesty." The words fell like a hammer, silencing the entire hall. The crackle of tension was almost audible. Kalen's eyes, usually so controlled, narrowed. His jaw tightened. He had faced armies, storms, and assassins without fear, yet here he stood, disarmed by a single phrase. "You refuse me?" he asked, his tone low, but the undercurrent of surprise and something darker, something almost unfamiliar, slipped through. "I do," Alara said simply, "not because I dishonor you or your kingdom, but because I am not yours to command, and I will not be swayed by fear or obligation." A murmur swept through the room. Nobles exchanged anxious glances. Some whispered about rebellion, others about folly. Kalen rose slowly from his throne, each movement deliberate, and the hall seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence. The torches flared higher as if responding to his anger. "You are bold," Kalen said, his voice a growl that resonated like distant thunder. "Few have ever spoken to me this way, fewer have lived to tell it." "I do not fear you," Alara replied, her eyes steady. "I will not live under your shadow, nor bend to what you desire of me." For a moment the hall seemed to hold its breath. Nobles dared not move, dared not speak. Kalen's hand twitched at his side, and yet he did not strike. Instead, he studied her. His dark eyes softened ever so slightly, flickers of curiosity, and something far more complicated passing across his face. "You have spirit," he said finally, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "A rare fire, perhaps too rare." Alara held his gaze. Fire should never be hidden, it should burn freely. Kalen's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without another word, he turned and swept from the hall. The doors slammed behind him, a sound that echoed like a storm breaking. The nobles let out silent breaths, the tension slowly easing but leaving a residue of unease. They had witnessed an act no one had ever dared, a rejection of the Alpha King. Alara remained where she stood, her heart still racing, though not with fear. There was relief, yes, but also a strange awareness that she had crossed into uncharted territory. Kalen's gaze lingered in her memory, and with it, a sense of challenge, one she could not yet name. After a few moments, she turned and left the hall, her steps measured, her mind alert. Outside, the garden stretched under the moonlight, silver leaves trembling in the gentle wind. Here, she allowed herself a brief exhale, letting the quiet night wash over her. Yet even in this calm, she could feel the shadow of Kalen's presence lingering, like the aftertaste of a storm that had passed too close. The next days were filled with whispers. Nobles debated the consequences of her defiance. Some plotted her ruin, others secretly admired her courage. Alara, however, moved with purpose. She did not seek to provoke or challenge Kaelin further, not yet, but she knew that by standing against him, she had entered a game far larger than herself. And Kaelin, the unyielding king, would not forget. Meanwhile, in the depths of his private chambers, Kaelin sat alone, staring at the throne he had abandoned. His mind replayed her words, her eyes, the unflinching strength in her voice. He had conquered kingdoms, tamed armies, and subdued countless rivals, yet Alara had resisted him entirely. It was not just a rejection of a proposal. It was a refusal to bend before power, to submit to expectation. And it intrigued him. For hours he traced her words in his mind, trying to understand why they stirred something within him, a mixture of frustration, admiration, and a dangerous curiosity. No king could have faced such defiance and remained unaffected, yet he found himself unwilling to let it go. In the days that followed, Kaelin's advisors noticed a subtle shift. He no longer moved with the usual decisiveness. He lingered over decisions, asked questions that seemed beneath him, and most alarming to the court. He sent emissaries to observe Lady Alara, not to coerce or threaten, but to learn. His interest was no longer purely political. It had become personal, and that was far more unpredictable. Alara, for her part, sensed the quiet eyes upon her. Shadows seemed to move differently when she walked, and whispers followed her steps. She knew Kaelin's reach was long, and though she had rejected him openly, she also knew that kings of his stature did not simply forget. Her defiance had lit a spark, and sparks, once struck, could ignite fires beyond control. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged mountains that bordered the kingdom, Alara wandered the edge of the forest that skirted the palace grounds. The light of the dying day painted the sky in bruised purples and golds. Here she could think freely, away from the stares and whispers of the court. And yet, even here, a sense of unease lingered. She could feel it in the wind, the faint brush of shadow against her skin, the almost imperceptible hum of power watching. It was then that she saw him standing across the clearing, his form half hidden among the trees. Kaelin, not an emissary, not a guard, himself watching. His presence was silent, commanding, yet there was no threat in his posture, only observation. "You are persistent," Alara said, her voice steady, carrying across the clearing. "I am intrigued," Kaelin replied, stepping into the light so that the fading sun caught the angles of his face. "Few have ever spoken to me as you have. Fewer still have made me consider." "I do not wish to make you consider," Alara said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I only wish to live my own life, free of shadows that do not belong to me." Kaelin smiled faintly, a dangerous, knowing curve of his lips. "And yet here we stand. In the shadow of the same kingdom, bound by circumstances neither of us can fully control." Alara felt the weight of his gaze, a mixture of power, curiosity, and something else she could not yet name. Fear, perhaps. But there was also fascination, a spark of something that could either ignite a bond or consume them both. "You should leave," she said finally, her tone soft but firm. "The court will notice your absence soon." "I cannot," he replied, his voice low, almost a whisper meant only for her. "Not yet. There is more to this than rejection, Lady Alara, more than politics, more than pride. You have awakened something I did not know slept within me." Alara met his eyes, and for a moment the air between them seemed to hum, alive with unspoken tension. She understood then that her defiance had done more than shock the court. It had stirred the heart of a king, and perhaps something even older and darker than ambition. "Then you are already lost," she said quietly, turning to leave. But even as she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, unwavering, filled with questions she did not yet wish to answer. The night closed around the shadowed kingdom, and in the halls of the castle, the echo of her rejection lingered like a whisper in the stone. "Kaelin," alone in his chambers, traced her words over and over in his mind. Ilara, in her solitude, felt the weight of the eyes that followed her every step, and somewhere deep within both of them, a storm had begun, a storm that neither time, power, nor pride could easily quell. The grand hall remained silent now, emptied of whispers and tension. Yet the memory of her words, clear and unflinching, would not fade. "I cannot accept your offer." Simple words, yet enough to unsettle a king, enough to change the course of destinies. And so the game began. The moon hung low over the shadowed kingdom, casting silver light over the forest that bordered the castle walls. Leaves whispered in the gentle wind, shadows stretching long and strange across the earth. In this quiet, Lady Alara moved carefully along a narrow path, her cloak brushing against the underbrush. The night was meant to be her sanctuary, a place away from court whispers and royal eyes. Yet even here, the weight of Kaelin's presence lingered, as though the forest itself remembered his dark gaze. She had sensed him before she saw him. It was the subtle disturbance in the air, the way shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, and the faint hum of power she could feel pressing against the edges of her awareness. She stopped, her hand resting on the hilt of the small dagger at her waist, though she knew it was more for comfort than defense. "Lady Alara," a voice called softly from the darkness, smooth, low, and undeniably commanding. "You move as though you expect someone to follow you." Alara did not turn immediately. Instead, she allowed a single word to pass her lips, steady as a blade. "I do." From between two great oaks, Kaelin stepped into the silver light, his black cloak blending with the night. He moved with the quiet assurance of a predator, yet there was no threat in his posture, only observation, intense and unyielding. "You have courage," he said, stepping closer, the soft crunch of his boots on the forest floor barely audible. "Or perhaps foolishness. Either way, it is admirable." Alara faced him, her eyes steady, unblinking. "I have lived my life by my own rules," she said, "and I will not bend them to anyone, not even a king." Kaelin's eyes, dark and unreadable, studied her. "Even a king who commands armies, who holds the fate of thousands in his hands." "Yes," Alara replied, her voice calm, "especially him." There was a pause, a silence thick with unspoken thoughts. Kaelin moved closer, but not threateningly, his shadow stretching over her as the moonlight kissed the forest floor. "You should not underestimate me, Lady Alara," he said. "I am not accustomed to being refused, and yet here you are, standing unshaken." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you wish me to tremble, to bow and obey as others do?" Kaelin shook his head slightly, a dark, enigmatic smile curling at the corners of his lips. "No," he said. "I wish to understand you, why you defy me. Why your spirit burns brighter than the fear in the hearts of every courtier in my hall." Alara felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear, but from the intensity of his gaze. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "some fires are not meant to be controlled." He studied her for a long moment, his mind a storm of curiosity and fascination. "Then it is no wonder you cannot be mine," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You are a force I cannot command. And yet—" his voice trailed, unfinished, leaving a space heavy with tension. Alara met his eyes, unwavering, though her pulse quickened. She knew the danger in being alone with him in this moonlit forest, yet she could not turn away. There was a strange pull between them, a thread woven by defiance, curiosity, and something deeper, something neither dared to name aloud. "You should leave," she said at last, her tone firm. "You risk being seen. The court will notice your absence, and I will not be the cause of another scandal." Kaelin's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, and then hardened again. "I am already lost," he said quietly, stepping even closer, close enough that she could see the storm behind his eyes. "Lost to your defiance, to your fire too." He stopped, as if the words themselves were dangerous. Alara felt her heart tighten, the pull between them growing heavier, more insistent. "Do not speak lightly," she warned, though a part of her could not ignore the truth in his words. Kaelin's hand hovered near hers, not touching, yet the space between them seemed charged, alive with a tension that neither the shadows nor the night could contain. "I will not harm you," he said, "but I cannot let you walk away from this, not yet. Not until I know the strength that drives you, the spirit that defies me." Alara drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of his presence pressing against her resolve. "And if I refuse you again," he tilted his head slightly, dark eyes gleaming, "then I will respect it in my own way." The forest seemed to lean closer, holding its breath as they stood in that fragile space between challenge and fascination. Neither moved, yet the world itself seemed to shift around them. For the first time, Kaelin realized that this woman was not merely a noble to be claimed. She was a force, equal in fire and will to any king or warrior he had known. "You are different," he said finally, his voice lower, almost a whisper. "Not like the others. Not like anyone I have ever met." "I am aware," Alara replied, her tone steady, though a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, or caution crossed her eyes. "And you should be wary. The more you seek to know me, the more you risk becoming more than yourself." Kaelin let out a low chuckle, the sound like distant thunder. "Perhaps I am already more than myself. Perhaps your fire has already begun to change me." Alara's eyes narrowed slightly, her instincts warning her, yet a strange warmth touched her chest. The Alpha King, for all his darkness, for all his power, was not what she had expected. There was pain there, hidden beneath layers of control, and she glimpsed a loneliness that even the crown could not fill. "You should go," she repeated, though her voice lacked its previous firmness, "before this becomes dangerous." Kaelin stepped back, but the tension did not fade. "Dangerous is already here," he said softly. "In every glance, in every word between us, there is a storm waiting to break." Alara turned to leave, the soft rustle of her cloak blending with the whispering leaves. Yet even as she walked, she felt the pull of his gaze, unwavering and intense, like a shadow that followed her every step. She knew that the game had begun, not one of conquest, but of understanding, challenge, and perhaps something deeper. The nights that followed were filled with whispers of shadow and movement. Kaelin sent no threats, no soldiers, only quiet observations. He would appear where she least expected, in moonlit gardens at the edges of the forest, or near the old temples abandoned by time. Each encounter was a delicate dance, a clash of wills and curiosity. Alara began to see the man behind the crown, not the fearsome Alpha King who ruled with iron and shadow, but a man shaped by loss, by the weight of responsibility, and by secrets too dangerous to reveal. And yet, even as she saw these cracks in his armor, she remained wary. Defiance was her shield, and she would not give it up easily. One evening, Kaelin found her at the edge of the Silver Lake, where mist rose like spirits from the water. The moon reflected off its surface, casting ripples of silver and black across her face. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her, yet his presence was unmistakable. "You are restless," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Even in solitude you do not find peace." Alara did not turn immediately. Instead, she gazed at the water, the reflection of the moon dancing on the surface. "Peace is not mine to find," she said quietly. "Not while shadows linger over my path." Kaelin moved closer, standing beside her. "Then perhaps you have been looking in the wrong place," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Perhaps peace comes not from hiding from shadows, but from facing them, with someone who understands them." Alara felt the pull of his words, the sincerity behind them, and yet she forced herself to remain still. "I am not yours to save," she said, her voice firm though her heart betrayed her. "No," he admitted, a shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "You are not. But I cannot stop myself from trying to understand, from trying to stand beside you, even if only for a moment." The air between them shimmered with tension, the night holding its breath as they stood on the edge of something neither could yet name. It was a dangerous closeness, a forbidden pursuit that could not exist under the light of day, yet it thrived here, in the quiet silver glow of moon and mist. Alara turned away finally, retreating into the shadows of the trees. Kalen watched her go, the weight of her defiance pressing against him, stirring something older and darker than desire, something that could neither be tamed nor ignored. And as she disappeared into the night, both of them understood that this was only the beginning. The court had not yet seen the true depth of their connection, nor the storms that lay ahead. Defiance, curiosity, and unspoken tension would drive them together, even as danger and secrets threatened to tear them apart. The forest remained silent after she left, save for the whispering leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Yet Kalen's shadow lingered, a quiet promise that he would not relent, that he would continue this forbidden pursuit, driven not by conquest, but by a fascination he did not yet fully comprehend. The night had begun, and with it, a dance of fire and shadow that neither the Alpha King nor Lady Alara could resist. The ruins of the old temple lay hidden deep within the forest, half swallowed by ivy and shadow. Broken pillars leaned at strange angles, and the walls bore faint traces of faded murals depicting battles between men and dark forces long forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of moss and ancient stone, carrying the weight of centuries. It was a place where secrets lived, where the past whispered to those who dared to listen. Lady Alara moved cautiously through the ruins, her steps careful on the cracked stone. She had come here to seek answers, to understand the mysterious burden that had shadowed her family for generations. Her ancestors had wielded powers tied to the old magic, forces both feared and revered. Alara's own gift was subtle yet potent, a connection to the unseen threads of fate that bound people and events together. It was why Kaelin's presence had stirred something within her, and why she could feel him always near, like a shadow at the edge of her perception. Kaelin followed quietly, his boots silent on the stone, his cloak brushing lightly against the walls. Unlike the courtiers who feared him, Alara had not shrunk from his presence. She had seen the man behind the king, glimpsed the cracks in his armor, the loneliness that haunted him. And yet she remained wary. There was danger in being close to a king who had conquered kingdoms with his strength, and she could not forget that. "You could have sent a messenger," Alara said finally, her voice echoing through the hollow temple, "or stayed in your throne room, ruling over shadows and fear." "I could," Kaelin admitted, his voice low, carrying just enough warmth to stir the air between them. "But that would not satisfy me. I need to understand you, to see the fire that defies me, to see the truth behind your eyes." Alara turned to face him, the moonlight filtering through the broken roof, painting his features in silver and shadow. "And what will you do when you see it? When you see what I carry, the curse, the responsibility, the weight that is mine alone?" Kaelin stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Then I will face it with you," he said simply, "if you will let me." Alara's heart quickened. The words were both dangerous and compelling, and she felt the tension between them pull tighter like a string stretched to its limit. Yet she remained firm. "You do not understand," she said. "This is not something that can be tamed or controlled. Even you with all your power cannot protect me from it." Kaelin's lips curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Then perhaps I do not wish to tame it. Perhaps I wish only to stand beside it, beside you." For a long moment they stood in silence, the ruins around them holding their breath. The wind whispered through the broken pillars, carrying with it the scent of moss, stone, and something older, something that felt alive. And in that quiet, Alara saw it, a vulnerability behind Kaelin's strength, a quiet longing that mirrored her own fears and desires. But before either could speak further, a sudden noise shattered the stillness, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the temple. Shadows shifted, and from the darkness shapes emerged. Mercenaries sent by rival nobles, men who sought to exploit the unrest in the kingdom, and creatures whispered about in old tales, half human and half beast, twisted by dark magic. Kalen's hand went instinctively to his sword, and Alara summoned a thin thread of energy that shimmered faintly in her palm. They moved together with a grace born of necessity, Kalen cutting a path through the attackers, while Alara's power disoriented and repelled them. The fight was brief but intense, the ruins echoing with the clash of steel and the hiss of dark magic. And when it was over, both of them were panting, their breaths heavy in the cold night air. Kalen lowered his sword, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, a note of awe in his voice. Alara shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I do what I must, that is all." Yet the encounter had changed something. Danger had forced them into an unspoken alliance, revealing strengths and vulnerabilities alike. Kalen had seen her courage firsthand, and Alara had seen the man behind the king, his instincts, his skill, and the way he protected without hesitation. They moved deeper into the temple, guided by a sense of purpose that neither fully understood. Here, in the heart of the ruins, the air grew colder, heavier, and the faint hum of ancient magic became stronger. Alara knelt before an altar, brushing away centuries of dust to reveal a carved sigil, a mark of her lineage, tied to a power that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. "This was my family's secret," she said softly, her fingers tracing the lines of the sigil. "The power we wielded and the curse we carried. It binds me to a fate I cannot fully escape." Kalen knelt beside her, his presence a comforting weight. "You carry it well," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not as a burden, but as a strength." Alara's eyes flicked to him, searching his expression. "Do you know what it means to bear such a curse? To live with the knowledge that it could destroy everyone you care for?" Kalen's jaw tightened. "I do," he said quietly. "I have carried burdens of my own, decisions that shaped kingdoms, lives I could not save. I know what it is to be haunted by the past, to live with the weight of power and regret." For a moment, silence fell between them, filled only by the soft wind and the distant calls of night creatures. And in that silence, an understanding passed, an acknowledgement that both of them carried shadows, and that their meeting was no coincidence. Their fates, tangled in ways neither could fully comprehend, were beginning to weave together. But before they could dwell on this fragile connection, a sudden movement in the shadows drew their attention. From the far end of the temple, a figure stepped forward, a woman draped in black, her eyes glowing faintly with a supernatural light. She was a seer, a guardian of the old magic, and her arrival was no accident. "You tread dangerous paths," the woman said, her voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "Both of you. The threads of fate are not so easily controlled, and yet here you stand defiant together." Kalen's hand went instinctively to Alara's arm, a protective gesture she did not resist. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I am the keeper of what was lost," the woman replied, "and I have come to warn you. The curse that follows her is awakening, and the darkness that haunts you is not finished. If you continue down this path, you will face trials that test not only your strength but your hearts." Alara felt a shiver run through her, the weight of the woman's words pressing down on her. "What kind of trials?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. The woman's gaze softened, yet her eyes remained piercing. "Trials of trust, of sacrifice, and of desire. You will see each other as neither fully understands. You will confront the past and face the consequences of choices long buried. Only then can the bond between you be forged or broken." Kalen's dark eyes met Alara's, and in that glance 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Fear, curiosity, longing, and something else, something deeper stirred in the space between them. "We face it together," Kalen said finally, his voice low but firm. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." Alara looked at him, seeing both the king and the man, the power and the vulnerability, the shadow and the light. "Together," she agreed, though her voice carried the weight of caution and uncertainty. The woman nodded once, a faint smile touching her lips. Then may the threads of fate guide you, and may the shadows not consume you before you find the fire that binds you both. With that, she vanished into the darkness, leaving Kaelin and Alara alone amidst the ruins. The air felt heavier now, charged with the promise of trials yet to come, and the quiet understanding that their connection was no longer merely a matter of curiosity or defiance. It was fate intertwining their lives in ways neither could escape. Kaelin turned to her, the flickering moonlight catching the angles of his face, and for a moment the fear and uncertainty fell away, leaving only something raw and honest. "You are remarkable," he said softly, "and dangerous. But perhaps, for the first time, I do not wish to turn away from danger." Alara met his gaze, her own heart stirring. "And perhaps, for the first time, I do not wish to face it alone." The night deepened around them, the ruins of the temple standing as silent witnesses to a bond that was beginning to take shape. Both knew that trials awaited, that shadows from the past and dangers from the present would challenge them in ways they could not yet imagine. But for this moment at least they were together, standing side by side, fire against shadow, defiance meeting strength. And somewhere in the distance, the wind whispered of storms to come, of challenges that would test their trust, their courage, and the fragile spark of connection that now bound them. The shadowed kingdom lay under a heavy sky, the clouds churning like restless spirits. The wind howled through the castle's towers, carrying whispers of secrets and old power. Inside the grand hall, the torches flickered against the walls, casting long, trembling shadows. The throne stood empty, its steps polished and cold, as if waiting for a reckoning that had long been coming. Lady Alara moved through the hall, her cloak brushing the marble floor, her eyes sharp and aware. Kaelin walked beside her, his armor dark, his posture a mixture of readiness and weariness. Both carried the weight of what had come before, the dangers they had faced, the secrets they had uncovered, and the bond that had grown between them, delicate yet undeniable. Tonight the court would gather once more. Yet this time it was not for ceremony or diplomacy, it was for confrontation. Those who had opposed them, whispered against them, or sought to exploit the darkness would come to test the Alpha King and the woman who had defied him. Alara's hand brushed against Kaelin's arm, a small, steadying gesture that carried more meaning than words. "We are ready," she said quietly, her voice carrying a calm strength that belied the storm within her. Kaelin's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw both the man and the king. "Together," he said, echoing their promise from the temple ruins. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." They entered the hall, and the nobles froze, whispers rippling like a tide across the marble floor. The courtiers had expected Kaelin to confront his enemies alone, to strike fear into them as he always did. Instead, he stood beside Alara, his hand resting lightly at her back, not possession but protection. At the far end of the hall, a figure emerged from the shadows, a noble who had long sought to undermine Kaelin, now armed with rumors and allies. His eyes flicked between Kaelin and Alara, doubt and fear mingling with anger. "You dare bring her here?" he demanded, his voice shaking, though his bravado tried to hide it. "Do you not see what she is? A woman with powers that could destroy kingdoms." Kaelin's eyes darkened, but he did not strike. "I see her," he said slowly, "and I see her strength. And I will not deny what is right before me. She is no threat, except to those who cannot see truth when it stands in front of them." Alara stepped forward, her gaze steady. "I am not here to fight for power or titles," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "I am here to confront what has been hidden, to face what has haunted us both, and to stand for what is just. No one here has the right to decide my fate but me." A hush fell over the hall. Even those who had long feared Kaelin's wrath felt the weight of her words. She spoke not with arrogance but with conviction, with a fire that did not burn others but illuminated her truth. The noble sneered but took a cautious step back. "You think words can protect you," he said. "Power lies in control, in fear. Do not pretend to understand forces beyond your comprehension." Kalen's hand tightened briefly on the hilt of his sword, a subtle reminder of the authority he wielded. Yet his other hand, lightly brushing against Alara's back, spoke of trust and partnership. "Control is not strength," he said evenly, "and fear is no measure of power. True strength lies in choice, in courage, and in standing with those who dare to face the darkness together." From the corners of the hall, shadows stirred. Dark creatures, the remnants of curses long forgotten, emerged silently, their eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight. The court had been warned in whispers, yet none had anticipated the true depth of danger. Alara's fingers tingled with the familiar pull of her magic, the power of her lineage awakening fully, guided by the presence of Kalen beside her. "Stay behind me," Kalen said softly, his voice a shield as much as a command. "We face this together." Alara nodded, stepping close. Together they moved forward, confronting the creatures with a unity born of trust and understanding. Kalen's strength was formidable, his sword slicing through shadow and dark steel alike, while Alara's magic wove around him, turning the creatures' attacks aside, binding them in place and dissolving their power. It was a dance of shadow and light, of force and will, and the nobles watched in stunned silence as the king, and the woman he had once sought to claim, now his equal in fire and courage, moved as one. When the final creature fell, a hush descended over the hall, broken only by the labored breathing of those who had witnessed the confrontation. The noble who had spoken first fell to his knees, his face pale with awe and fear. I underestimated you both," he whispered, unable to meet their eyes. Kalen did not speak, only sheathed his sword and allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. Alara's gaze met his, and in that silent exchange, years of tension, defiance, and unspoken emotion passed between them. "You have changed the court tonight," Alara said softly, "not by force but by standing in truth." "And you have changed me," Kalen replied, his voice low and sincere. "I have ruled with fear, with strength, and with cunning. But you have shown me what it means to face power with choice, to wield strength with purpose, and to find courage in what is just." Alara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a fire that was not fear, nor pride, nor desire alone, but something deeper, a connection forged in trials, in shared shadows, and in the awakening of trust. Kalen knelt before her suddenly, not as a king demanding submission, but as a man laying down the weight of his pride. "I do not seek to command you," he said quietly. "I do not seek to bind you with crown or title. I stand here offering myself not as a ruler, but as someone who wishes to walk beside you if you will let me." Alara's eyes widened, her heart catching in her throat. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the nobles frozen in a mixture of awe and disbelief. This was not the act of a king asserting dominance. This was the surrender of a man who had learned the value of trust, respect, and partnership. For a long moment she said nothing, feeling the weight of the gesture, the honesty, and the vulnerability laid bare before her. Then slowly she knelt to meet him, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. "And I accept you," she said, her voice steady, yet carrying the tremor of deep emotion. "Not because of who you were or what you are, but because of what we have become together." A silence fell, profound and sacred, as the hall seemed to exhale with them. The torches flickered, casting long, gentle shadows over their figures, and for the first time the kingdom seemed to feel lighter, as though the weight of fear and darkness had lifted, if only slightly. Kalen rose, taking her hand not to claim her but to honor her choice. "Then let us face the future together," he said, and in that moment the Alpha King and Lady Alara were no longer separate entities of power and defiance. They were a union of courage, understanding, and mutual respect. The court, once fearful and tense, slowly began to stir. Murmurs of awe and admiration filled the hall. Nobles who had sought to undermine them now bowed, not only to Kaelin's power, but to the strength and wisdom of the woman who had stood beside him. Outside, the night had softened, the clouds parting to reveal the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe, relieved of tension and shadow, yet aware that challenges would always come. What mattered was that they had faced the storm together and emerged not broken but bound by a force stronger than fear or pride, trust and choice. Kaelin turned to Alara, his dark eyes softening. "You have taught me more than any victory, more than any conquest," he said. "You have taught me what it means to see clearly, to trust, and to love, not as a king but as a man." Alara smiled, a faint, radiant curve of lips that carried both relief and joy. "And you have taught me that even power can be tempered with respect, even shadow can be softened by courage, and even a heart as guarded as yours can learn to trust." They walked together through the hall, their hands brushing, not as master and subject, not as king and noble, but as equals, partners who had faced darkness, risk, and temptation, and emerged stronger for it. Outside, the morning light spilled over the kingdom, painting the towers and walls in gold and silver, as though blessing the bond they had forged. Yet even as peace settled, there remained an understanding between them. The world would always bring trials, shadows would rise, and power would tempt and threaten. But they had faced the storm, and they would face the future together, side by side, fire against shadow, courage against fear. The Alpha King and Lady Alara stood at the threshold of a new dawn, the echo of their journey lingering in the air. They had learned the lessons of defiance, trust, and partnership, and in their union a new story had begun, one of hope, courage, and the enduring strength of hearts unafraid to face the shadows together.